My son chose his real father after 18 years of silence. And that choice uncovered a paternity lie, shattered loyalty, and ended fatherhood. Foreve. Thanks for everything, but I want to get to know my real dad now. That's what the boy said, my boy. 18 years of lunches packed, knees bandaged, midnight rides, parent-teacher nights, asthma meds, football games. And that's how it ended. In a garage that still smelled faintly of the old crib I stored for some godforsaken reason. Dylan didn't look angry. He didn't look guilty. He looked transactional, like I was a stepping stone. He was politely stepping over. He gave me one of those half hugs, shoulders barely touched, arms limp, no weight behind it. Then he turned and walked back into the house like he'd just returned a borrowed wrench. Claire stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her face unreadable, except it wasn't unreadable. I've seen that look before on a nurse's face when she's about to deliver bad news and wants to get it over with. I nodded, didn't flinch, didn't blink, just nodded. He didn't even ask how I felt, and Claire didn't say a word. I walked to the edge of the garage and watched him drive off in Gregory's Lexus. Funny, he never liked that brand until last week. I caught a glimpse of Claire in the window, peeking through the blinds like she was waiting for the storm to pass. She didn't know I'd already heard her on the phone 2 months ago whispering to someone. He was never Harold's. I just couldn't tell him. That whisper had been echoing in my skull ever since, scraping away the walls I'd built. I didn't say a word back then either. Not when I found the phone bill with the late-night calls to Gregory. Not when I saw the photo frame in Dylan's room flipped around, hiding the picture of me and him at the Grand Canyon. Not even when I picked up Dylan's phone to call in his prescription refill and saw his contact for me changed from Dad to Harold. I stood there in the fading afternoon light, dust particles dancing in a beam of sun through the cracked garage door, and I made a decision. Not out of anger, not revenge, just silence. That night, I went to my study, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a white envelope. It had been sitting there for months, paternity, confidential. I had never opened it. The day I picked it up from the lab, I drove around for hours, then slid it into the drawer and told myself, you already know. But you're a father, not a biologist. But tonight something shifted. I didn't open it yet, not out of fear. I wanted the moment to be right, clean, sharp, undeniable. I slipped it into the fireproof safe and then opened a fresh page in my old black notebook, the same one I used to track training logs when I ran the firehouse. At the top of the page, I wrote one word, wait. Then I drew a line beneath it. No dates, no names, just the word. Because some things don't need to be rushed. Some truths don't need an audience right away. If you are listening this far, and you're one of the 98% who watch but haven't subscribed, help me hit my first 10,000 subscribers. It motivates the team behind these stories to go even harder. We're building this from scratch, brick by brick. Your support is what keeps it alive. I slept in the guest room that night, not because I was banished there, but because I wanted distance. I needed to hear my own breath again without Claire's half-truths smothering the air. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Dylan's first Christmas. How he used to hum when he fell asleep. How he once told his second-grade class he wanted to be a firefighter like my dad. Then I closed my eyes and rewrote the memory because apparently that dad was just a placeholder. And placeholders don't cry. They plan. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was surgical cold. Every noise, the fridge kicking on, Claire's footsteps upstairs, the hollow sound of the ice settling in my glass felt like a scalpel tracing along nerves I didn't even know I had left. I sat in my study with the lights low and the old jazz station playing just loud enough to keep the walls from caving in. On the desk sat my phone, screen still lit up with Dylan's contact. I stared at it for a moment. No photo, no custom ringtone, just Dylan. I pressed and held. The prompt appeared, delete contact. I didn't hesitate. Thumb down, gone. He wouldn't call me if he got in a car accident. He wouldn't call me if he broke his leg. I wasn't Dad anymore. I was just Harold, so why pretend? I opened the side drawer, the one where I kept things I didn't want to see but couldn't throw away. Old service medals, Claire's wedding vows, and that envelope. Still sealed, still marked in plain black type, paternity, confidential. I remembered the day I requested the test months ago. The lab tech had looked at me like I was asking for a gun permit. I'd smiled, told him it was just for peace of mind. But it wasn't. It was for survival because I'd already heard Claire whisper into her phone. He doesn't even know. I never told him. He's not really his. She said it in the laundry room. Thought I was asleep upstairs. I wasn't. I just laid there in bed with my eyes wide open, letting the ceiling fan click its little metronome of betrayal. I never confronted her, not once. I watched. I waited. I studied her like smoke in a burning room. How it moves, how it clings, how it warrants. I held the envelope now in my hand. It felt heavier than it should. Paper and ink shouldn't carry this kind of weight. I turned it over a few times like maybe the answer would bleed through the seal if I looked hard enough. Then I stood, crossed the room, and opened the fireproof safe in the wall. I placed the envelope inside, shut the door, and spun the lock. Not yet. I went back to the desk, opened the notebook I hadn't touched since retirement, and wrote one line in block letters. Wait. No context, no timeline, just that. Because I knew something was coming. I didn't know what form it would take or when it would land, but it was on its way. I could feel it in my joints, the same way we used to smell a gas leak before a fire ever started. Claire didn't ask where I slept that night. She didn't ask why I didn't speak over breakfast or why I didn't pour her coffee. She just kept checking her phone, like she was waiting for someone else to text first. Probably Gregory, Mr. Real Dad. She'd always had a talent for reshaping history, for rearranging facts until they served her version better. She was never cruel about it, just precise. Like a scalpel, same as the silence. I started making a list in my head. Not a revenge list, a preparation list. Old firemen don't fight blazes with rage, we fight them with containment. If Dylan was Gregory's son, I needed to know what that meant legally, financially, emotionally. If he wasn't Gregory's, then we had an entirely different problem. One that would tear Claire's tidy little narrative apart at the seams. And if he wasn't mine or Gregory's, well, that would change everything. Claire made roast lamb. She only makes that dish when she wants to impress someone. I hadn't tasted it since the mayor visited our firehouse 5 years ago. The good china was out too. The stuff that needs to be hand-washed because dishwashers don't respect detail. The table was set for 4 o'clock. I guess I should have been flattered I still had a plate. Gregory showed up 10 minutes late. Cologne hitting the hallway before he even crossed the threshold. He wore one of those blazers that looks casual until you notice the label. Then it screams, money without effort. He handed Claire a bottle of wine like he'd practiced it, some imported nonsense I couldn't pronounce. She giggled, not laughed. Giggled like a damn teenager. Dylan lit up when Gregory walked in. Full smile, shoulders high, voice louder. That used to be my entrance. I used to be the one he waited up for. Now I was a placeholder in a chair he didn't bother pulling out. Dinner was a performance. Gregory talked about some firm he was consulting for contracts, travel, stock options. I've got connections at University of California, Davis, he said. Might be able to fast-track some scholarship paperwork if you're serious, Dylan.
Wow, really? Dylan said, eyes wide, like he just found out Santa was real again. That would be incredible.
Claire leaned in. It's good to have someone with reach, finally. I said nothing. Just cut my lamb and chewed slowly while Gregory talked like he'd been raising the boy all along. Like he hadn't been a ghost for nearly 2 decades, and now decided to show up with a wine bottle and some LinkedIn buzzwords. At one point, Gregory even chuckled and said, You know, Harold, raising a teenager is no joke. Thanks for keeping him in one piece. I looked at him, smiled. All credit to genetics, right? He laughed. Claire didn't. After dessert, which Claire baked from scratch and I hadn't seen her do in years, I started clearing plates. No one offered to help. Dylan and Gregory were too busy laughing about some recruiting trip or golf retreat or whatever. Claire poured more wine. In my own home, I was background noise, a waiter, an afterthought. I brought the last plate into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and just stood there, water running, knuckles wide on the rim of the sink. I could hear them behind me talking, toasting, planning. A family, but not mine. Later that night, when the dishes were done and the guests were gone, Claire stood at the doorway of the study. Her arms were crossed, but not in anger. More like she was preparing herself to say something she'd rehearsed. He deserves to know who his father really is, she muttered. No eye contact. I didn't look up from my notebook. Sure, I said. Just let me know when you figure it out. She said nothing, didn't move, just lingered a second too long before backing away. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the place where Dylan had laughed so freely, so easily with a man who hadn't been there for a single scraped knee or a 2 a.m. fever, and I realized something. I wasn't losing a son. I was watching a house of cards rebuild itself with counterfeit pieces, but I knew the truth, and the truth doesn't need applause, it waits. The lawyer's office smelled like cedar and quiet judgment. I'd known Mitchell Kent since he was a hot-headed public defender with a cheap suit and a coffee addiction. Now he wore tailored wool and had a view of the harbor. Still chewed the inside of his cheek when he was nervous, though some habits never die. Others you kill. I need to amend the will, I said, sitting across from him. He raised an eyebrow. Everything all right with your health? I'm not dying, I said. I'm evolving. He chuckled awkwardly, then opened the folder on the desk between us. What are we looking at? Remove Dylan as my healthcare proxy. College fund. Close it, roll it into a trust for something else. He paused. You sure about that? I nodded. I raised him. I won't ruin him. But I also won't be used like an ATM in a fireman's jacket. Mitchell didn't push back. He'd seen enough betrayal buried under legalese to know when a man wasn't bluffing. What do you want to do with the assets instead? Create a scholarship. Quiet, private, no photo ops or headlines. Just kids of firefighters who didn't make it home. Give them a shot at college, trade school, whatever helps. Call it the Red Line Fund. He looked up from his notepad and for a brief second something softened in his expression. That's a hell of a legacy, Harold. No, I said, staring out the window. It's a correction. The next hour was signatures, forms, dates. I revoked Claire's durable power of attorney while I was at it. Not out of spite, just clarity. She'd made her choices. She wanted Gregory to be the man of the house. Fine, let him carry the legal burdens too. Let him pick up the phone when Dylan breaks his leg snowboarding and the hospital asks who's on the insurance. By the time I left the building, the fog had rolled in over the water. Gulls circled like something was dying. I stopped at a diner I used to visit on night shifts. Sat at the corner booth, ordered black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. No reason, just habit. The waitress, a new girl, couldn't have been older than 20, smiled as she set it down. Rough day? She asked. I looked at the pie. No, clean one. On the way home, I passed a billboard advertising a family law firm. Protect what matters most. I almost laughed. What matters most is the truth, and the truth doesn't need a lawyer. It just needs time. When I got home, Claire was in the living room folding laundry like we were still playing house. I walked past her, didn't speak, didn't stop. She called out after a few seconds, "You okay?" I paused in the hallway. I'm adjusted. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she would. In the garage, I stood in front of the old fireproof safe, hand resting on the handle. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I walked over to the corner, grabbed my toolbox, and began fixing the loose shelf Dylan had broken years ago with his soccer trophies. I replaced the warped plank, sanded the edges, made it stronger. Funny how sometimes things become sturdier after they've been fractured. 3 weeks after the dinner, the shine started to wear off Gregory. It began with a missed college visit. Dylan had been hyped all week talking about how Gregory knew someone at admissions, how this would open doors that no guidance counselor could. He even bought a new button-down shirt and cleaned his sneakers with a toothbrush. That morning, he sat on the porch, backpack by his feet, waiting. Gregory never showed. No call, no text, just silence. Dylan sat there for an hour, then Claire tried to play it off. Maybe something urgent came up. But Dylan didn't move. Just stared at the driveway like it had betrayed him personally. 3 days later, it happened again. A campus tour Gregory promised to attend. We'll grab dinner after, maybe meet the department head. But this time, Dylan didn't even dress up. He waited 20 minutes, then walked back inside, past me without a word. Claire cornered him in the hallway, said something about scheduling mix-ups and grown-up responsibilities. I didn't comment, didn't need to. The silence between Dylan and his hero was growing louder by the day. That Sunday, as I sat at the breakfast table reading the paper, a small envelope arrived, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a thank you card from Marcus Hastings, a cadet I had mentored years ago during one of those high school ride-to-along programs we ran at the station. Dear Mr. Don, it read, I just got hired by Sacramento Fire Department. First shift starts Monday. I still remember everything you taught me, especially your rule. Don't be the loudest voice in the room. Be the one they look to when the sirens start. You were that guy for me. I just wanted you to know. You changed my life. I stared at the card for a long time. Claire was making eggs in the kitchen. She glanced over, casual but not. Who's it from? Someone who meant it when he said thank you, I said without looking up. She stopped stirring for a beat, then went back to her pan more aggressively this time. I folded the card, slid it into the inside cover of my notebook, and took a sip of coffee. Dylan came down later, hoodie pulled low, dragging his feet. He poured cereal, didn't say a word to either of us. Claire offered, Your dad Gregory called late last night. He was tied up at a conference. Dylan didn't even flinch, just stared at his cereal like he was trying to figure out if milk had an expiration date on trust. It was starting, not a blow-up. Not the kind of betrayal that slaps you across the face. No, this was erosion, slow, quiet, and relentless. He was learning his first real lesson. That biology doesn't show up when it matters. That DNA doesn't cheer in the rain or drive 4 hours to watch you sit on the bench. That a father isn't just a man who shares your blood. He's the one who stays. But Dylan had made his choice, and I wasn't in the business of chasing boys who handed me their backs. Claire, though, she was beginning to sweat. Not visibly, not yet. But I saw it, and how she lingered in doorways, how her tone shifted from confident to cautious. She knew Gregory wasn't reliable. She just never thought Dylan would notice so fast. And me, I had nothing left to prove. I was no longer the fallback. I was the absence they would have to explain. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope, the kind you don't get unless someone wants something or wants to hurt you legally. Claire opened it in the kitchen, hands trembling just enough to betray the performance she was about to stage. I watched from the hallway, unnoticed, as she skimmed through it. Her lips moved as she read like she couldn't believe the words even as her eyes confirmed them. I stepped in just as she reached the last page. She flinched like I'd caught her holding a murder weapon. She tried for casual. It's just from a lawyer. Gregory's, I said. Nothing. Her eyes darted. It's about establishing paternity formally. He wants his name on the birth certificate. Still nothing from me, she added, like tossing a wet match into a gas leak, and he's suing for back child support. There it was. The real bomb. Not paternity, not pride. Money. I poured myself a cup of coffee, let the silence stretch, then finally spoke without looking at her. Let him try. She blinked. What? I turned, met her eyes. Let him try. There was a pause, a thick, hollow one, and then she scrambled. You knew, she said quickly. You always suspected. You didn't say anything because it didn't matter, right? I mean, what does a test prove after all this time? You raised him. It was amazing how fast she reached for revisionism, like flipping through a Rolodex of lies and trying to find the one that still fit. My lawyer says if you contest it, it could get messy, she continued. I was now scanning for a weak spot in my reaction. For Dylan, he doesn't need this kind of conflict in his life right now. I took a sip of coffee. You're right, he needs stability, integrity, and example. Claire scoffed like that was a personal attack. Maybe it was, or maybe it was just the truth getting a little less polite. She placed the letter on the counter and crossed her arms. Gregory has every right. Gregory's rights he abandoned 18 years ago, I cut in. Rights don't accrue interest just because the guilt finally showed up. She paused too long. Then came the classic pivot. You're being vindictive. No, I said calmly, flatly. I'm being still. And stillness only bothers people who've been spinning their lies too fast to notice the cracks. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Claire sat down hard on the stool, the paper still trembling in her fingers. I watched her, then really watched her, the way her shoulders hunched just slightly forward, her gaze fixed on a knot in the countertop, the tip of her thumbnail tapping against the table in uneven rhythm. The lie was catching up to her, not just because Gregory was trying to turn parenthood into a financial negotiation, but because she'd built this whole house on the myth that I knew and chose to stay silent out of nobility. But now that myth was fraying, because I wasn't reacting how she expected. She thought I'd explode or plead or at least ask why. Instead, I was watching her drown in her own calm. Dylan came home that night, distracted, muttering something about a quiz. Claire tried to act normal, but her smile was too wide, her voice a half octave too high. He noticed. He just didn't ask. Not yet. But soon he would. And when he did, I wouldn't have to answer. The truth would. The envelope was pale yellow and stamped with Superior Court of California and bold, bureaucratic ink. It arrived on a Tuesday, wedged between a Home Depot flyer and a dental appointment reminder. Subtle, ordinary, like betrayal, dressed as junk mail. I opened it at the kitchen table while Claire was in the garden pretending to care about Rosemary. Subpoena, civil hearing, Gregory Carlton versus Harold Dunn. The claim, intentional deprivation of paternal rights, emotional damages, and financial restitution. I actually laughed, not loudly, just that short, bitter exhale that tastes like metal. He wasn't just claiming to be the father. He was claiming I had robbed him of the role. Like I was the one who ghosted 18 birthdays, 10 Halloweens for school dances, and 12 emergency room visits. Like I'd somehow faked fatherhood out from under his nose while he was too busy living a consequence-free life. Claire came back inside mid-laugh. She spotted the envelope immediately, her eyes locked on it like a weapon she forgot she loaded. Is that what I think it is? No, I said, folding it neatly. It's a wedding invitation. You and Greg are on the cake. She didn't rise to the sarcasm. Her hands trembled as she reached for a chair. He's serious? she asked, almost whispering. Looks like. Claire dropped into the seat like her legs gave up. This wasn't supposed to go this far. He said he just wanted recognition. No, Claire, you wanted recognition for him. He just wants money. She stared at me like I just turned into a stranger. Maybe I had. Or maybe I'd stopped being the accommodating ghost she could walk through without resistance. You can't let this go to court, she said quickly, breath short now. Think about Dylan. Think about how this will look. He doesn't need to see this play out like some courtroom drama. No, I said, walking over to the study. He needs to see the difference between a man who shows up and a man who shows receipts. She followed me down the hallway. Please, Harold, don't escalate this. I opened the drawer, pulled out the wide envelope, the same one that had been sitting there for months, unopened, labeled Paternity Confidential. I held it in my hand, turned to her, and handed it over gently like I was placing a scalpel in a surgeon's palm. You escalated it long ago. She froze, didn't reach for it. You remember the phone call, don't you? I continued softly. The one you made from the laundry room telling Gregory he should come back because Harold has no idea Dylan's not his. The one I wasn't supposed to hear. She didn't deny it, didn't breathe, just looked at the envelope like it had started ticking. I never opened it, I said, because I didn't need it until now. What are you going to do? Her voice cracked around the edges. I didn't answer because the answer didn't belong to her anymore. This wasn't about pride or revenge. It wasn't even about Dylan. Not entirely. It was about truth delivered clean, silent, and undeniable, the kind of truth you can't lawyer your way out of. The court date was 3 weeks away. Plenty of time for everyone to panic. Me? I'd already made peace. Now it was time for them to make war with their own reflection. Courtrooms have a strange smell, like dust, paper, and restraint. The kind of place where truths don't erupt, they seep. People sat straight back in wooden pews pretending they weren't eavesdropping. But everyone listens in family court. There's no shame in that building, just spectators, all waiting for someone else's life to crack. Gregory sat smug, flanked by his lawyer, some kid with too much gel and a folder thick enough to choke a copier. Dylan sat near the back, Claire at his side, hands knotted wide in her lap. Her mouth moved constantly, whispers, explanations, denials, whatever spell she was spinning to hold her son's loyalty a few more minutes. The judge was a woman in her 50s, calm eyes, no patience for theatrics. She skimmed the file in front of her, cleared her throat and said, Mr. Carlton, your petition requests formal paternity establishment, financial restitution for 18 years of child support, and joint legal recognition. Do you have documentation to support biological connection? Gregory's lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor. Based on testimony, Mr. Carlton is the biological father, and it. I didn't wait for him to finish. Your Honor, I said, reaching into my briefcase, I have a DNA test. There was a moment, a breath held too long. Claire turned sharply, her eyes shot to mine, pure panic. You can't submit that, she snapped, voice higher than she probably intended. He never. The judge raised a hand like a metronome stopping time. You may speak when addressed, Mr. Dunn. I stepped forward. This was taken months ago, sealed since then, chain of custody verified. It will clarify the question of paternity for all parties. I placed the envelope on the bench, white, unopened, labeled Paternity Confidential. The judge looked at me. Mr. Dunn, are you sure you want this entered into record? I nodded once. The courtroom seemed to lean forward as she sliced the seal with a silver letter opener. She pulled out the single page. I scanned line by line. Claire's lips mouthed something. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a curse. The judge's eyebrows lifted just slightly. An inch of surprise that felt like a scream. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat. According to this report, she said slowly, Gregory Carlton is not the biological father. Silence cracked the air like lightning. Gregory leaned forward. Excuse me, the judge continued, voice steady, merciless. Furthermore, the tested party, Harold Dunn, is also excluded. The test confirms a non-match between both claimants and the minor, Dylan Dunn. A sound escaped Claire's throat, half gasp, half choke. Dylan turned his head toward her so fast it was almost comedic. What? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Gregory stood up, stunned. There's no way. There's been a mistake, but the judge was already sliding the file toward the clerk. The results are clear and certified. If either party wishes to contest, they may file a motion, but this hearing as written is resolved. Dylan stood too now, pale as chalk. Mom. Claire reached for him. Maybe there was a time, just once, it didn't matter. Harold he is your dad. But Dylan had already stepped back. Her hand froze mid-air. The room was spinning and no one moved because the lie wasn't just broken. It was shattered, sharp and public, with everyone bleeding from it. The judge nodded to me. "Mr. Dunn, is there anything you'd like to add?" I looked at Dylan, at the boy who once held my hand across the street, at the ghost of a son I had built a life around. Then I looked at Claire. She couldn't even meet my eyes. "No," I said. "Nothing more to say." And I meant it. Claire looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her, and she was still trying to pretend gravity didn't exist. Her mouth opened, closed. No sound. The courtroom had gone quiet except for the soft rustle of papers and the occasional creak of old wood as someone shifted in their seat, trying to pretend they weren't watching lives implode. Dylan just stood there blinking like the air had turned toxic. His gaze went from Gregory, now sitting stunned and pale, to Claire, whose face had turned into a mask of desperate recalibration, and then finally to me. I held his gaze, not with anger, not with sadness, just finality. Then I stood. I nodded once to the judge. "Thank you for your time." No outburst, no tearful goodbye, just civility in its most surgical form. As I walked toward the rear exit, I pulled a plain envelope from my coat and placed it gently on the bench beside Dylan. It was unsealed, no dramatic wax stamp, no frills, just his name in my handwriting. He looked down at it, confused. Claire reached for it. Of course, she did, but he moved faster, snatching it from the bench like it might vanish. He didn't open it right away, just clutched it with both hands, still frozen in place as I walked past the rows of stunned faces. And I didn't look back. The letter read, "Dylan, I chose you." That's the part they'll never understand. I didn't stay because I had to. I stayed because I believed in you. You were never an obligation. You were never a mistake. You were my son, and I was proud of you every time you tried harder than the world expected. But when you turned away, when you walked out with a stranger and looked at me like a stranger in return, you didn't just make a choice, you closed a door. And I'm not angry, I'm not bitter. But I won't knock on a door that was shut in my face. Life will teach you more than I ever could now. About loyalty, about silence, about who shows up when nothing's easy anymore. Just remember something. A test didn't undo my love, but it did reveal the weight of yours. I'm not gone. I'm just done, Harold. By the time Dylan opened it, I was probably already halfway down the courthouse steps. I like to imagine he read it in silence. That for once, Claire didn't say a word. That Gregory, suddenly demoted from real dad to statistical error, just sat there swallowing the bitter medicine of being exposed not just as absent but irrelevant. Inside that room, everything collapsed, but outside I was already walking forward. I had nothing left to hold and no reason to stay where love had been treated like a rental agreement. And from that day on, if my name came up in their conversations, I imagine it came with a pause. Not regret, just the echo of someone they thought would stay and didn't. The old bench outside Engine 42 still creaked the same way it had when Dylan was 6 and used to sit there with a juice box watching his dad. His dad hosed down the trucks after a call. He sat there again now, taller, older, paper in hand, but looking more lost than he ever had as a child. The letter was creased from too much reading, faded at the edges. It had become something of a phantom limb, something he reached for even when he didn't realize it. The bay doors were open. Inside, a new crew shuffled around, laughing, swapping shift stories. A younger man leaned against the same fire engine Harold used to captain. Dylan didn't recognize a single face. That was fitting because the man who raised him, the one who used to come home smelling like smoke and black coffee, who taught him how to throw a spiral, how to sharpen a blade, how to keep your mouth shut until the smoke clears, wasn't part of this new chapter. Harold hadn't come back. After the court day, he vanished. Not in the theatrical sense. No burning rubber, no drama, just absence. His phone went to voicemail. His social media, what little there was, hadn't been touched. Claire had called every mutual friend. Nothing, like trying to dial into a frequency no longer broadcasting. He hadn't even come back for his own retirement plaque. But Dylan eventually found out where he went. The house, the home Harold had spent 2 decades shaping, patching, and defending, was no longer in their name. Title search showed it now belonged to the Red Line Foundation, a quiet nonprofit providing housing and education grants for children of firefighters killed in the line of duty. Dylan had driven past the house once, just to be sure. It was being remodeled. Kids played in the yard. Laughter echoed off the siding Harold had once painted himself. The garden Claire had ignored was now a memorial. Small brass plates naming fallen heroes embedded into the stone path. He didn't ring the doorbell, just sat in his car for 20 minutes, letter in hand. Claire lived alone now. Gregory had disappeared the moment the DNA results were unsealed. His pride couldn't survive the hit, and neither could his fake commitments. Dylan barely returned her calls anymore. Not out of vengeance, just inertia. Some distances aren't worth closing. At night, she still left Harold's chair untouched, still paused before deleting voicemails, still insisted to anyone who would listen that she never meant for it to go this far, but no one was listening. Dylan sometimes replayed the last few months like a bad dream he had to translate for himself. Gregory had shown up with charm and promises and left when the truth asked him for proof. Claire had bet on a narrative that crumbled the second someone demanded receipts. And Harold didn't scream, didn't throw a single plate. He simply peeled off the title of father and handed it back. Not with rage, but with precision. That was the part Dylan couldn't shake. He didn't lose Harold to a fight. He lost him to truth. There was no reconciliation letter. No surprise reunion. Just that final sentence in Harold's note. "I'm not gone. I'm just done." Dylan folded the letter again, placed it back in his pocket, and looked toward the firehouse. One of the new recruits stepped out, nodded politely. "You knew Chief Dunn?" he asked. Dylan hesitated, then nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I knew the man better than I deserved to." The recruit smiled, didn't press, and went back inside. The bench creaked again as Dylan stood. Legacy doesn't always leave a statue. Sometimes it leaves silence, and a story no one dares rewrite.